Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everyone, and welcome to this week's edition of Postgres Pulse. And this focus we're going to be directed at this time is Postgres transitions and getting your head in the clouds with respect to your overall journey. Now, I want to take a minute and give folks some guidelines. You want to stay muted unless you're talking. Use the Q&A button to ask a question. We will go ahead and unmute you if you do have questions. And all we ask is that you be civil and abide by the Postgres Code of Conduct, so that way we can have a productive and fruitful conversation. I am your host, Jamie Watt, and my co-host with me, Josh Heyer. We're here this week alongside Vibhor Kumar and our guest this week, Doug Ortiz. Doug, we'd like to take a minute to introduce yourself, please. Give us a little bit of color about your background, what your role is, and we'll go from there.
Sure, thank you. Thank you for the introduction. Well, my name is Doug Ortiz, and I've been happy to be here at EDB doing all things clouds, DevOps. Although I'm a DevOps engineer, we really touch a lot of subjects that go beyond just a cloud or just DevOps. We've been using technologies such as Ansible, Terraform, AWS, GCP, Azure, integration, automation, and it's been fun. It's been a really fun trip so far. I've been enjoying. It's great to work with Vibhor. We've gotten a lot of challenging deadlines met as well.
Great, thank you. And as a reminder for those who are joining either for the first time and perhaps would like to a little bit more information about what we're doing, we do have blogs that loosely follow the pattern that we do here, and we should be seeing a blog on this topic in the coming week. We do handle these sessions particularly so we can have a conversation about the subject and kind of dig into people's experiences, as well as the back and forth that we see for the different roles that are attacking the subject at hand. So as I mentioned, this week we're discussing cloud transitions. Now, this is typically for people who are coming from a traditional environment, and what sort of considerations do these bring to the DBA and their extended team, where you may be looking at infrastructure, be it from the perspective of networking or storage or the application support team, understanding what that journey really means, starting at the DBA position and kind of scaling out from there. Understanding your choices. What are the costs, the benefits, and the changes before you really pick your destination? So in advance of picking your destination, there's the initial question you have to answer, which is, are you looking to move to a database platform as a service, or are you looking to move to an infrastructure as a service option? So an example of the former would be AWS RDS or Azure Database for Postgres or Cloud SQL, whereas the latter is more focused on the compute side of things, going to whether it be AWS EC2 or Azure VMs or GCP VMs that afford you the flexibility of going into a cloud infrastructure without necessarily tying you to an automated database engine. There are benefits to either scenario. Most importantly, the aspects which are taken care of within database as a service certainly are attractive to some organizations, and the freedoms that are afforded you when you have full access, full control over the compute are beneficial to other organizations. It's all a matter of how you want to scale. So I want to kind of step back to what's the meaning of the cloud journey, and what's the importance of being able to distinguish between a choice of DBaaS versus infrastructure as a service. And Vibhor, you had mentioned something on one of our prior conversations around basically the cost of freedom. And I wonder if you could kind of reiterate what your thought process was there and how it maybe provides some context to the cloud conversation.
Sure. Again, DBaaS versus running on a normal virtual machine, which you get in the cloud, is a key thing. Some people believe that if they go with a DBaaS, database as a service platform, in that case, they don't have to manage the whole database itself. They can simply go and use the service and they will be happy.
It's just magic, right? You sign up for it, you give them your credit card, and then you never have to worry about it again.
Yeah, but when you give your credit card, over the period, there will be charges started accumulating, and you will be charged for that service too, right? So again, there is a cost associated with that. Initially, it will be very lucrative. Initially, it will feel like, okay, you're not paying much because based on the information shared by the provider, it's few cents or maybe a dollar, whatever it is. But over the period, as you start using your database a lot and putting more data inside the database and taking out the database plus other services which you're using it, plus the database growth, the backup and all those things. If you add all those costs, right, it may be very expensive. I know the services are automated there, but with those, there's a cost associated with that. That's a one factor. Second is the flexibility. You lose the flexibility in the sense, let's suppose, I mean, again, it's a very old quote, right? You don't want to keep all your apples in a one basket. If you go with the database as a service platform, then it becomes very difficult to move your data and the services from one provider to the another provider, because you're pretty much dependent on what provider is offering you, how you would like to move your data around, right? And when you go with just keeping the database into a normal virtual machine, you use the whole features and functionality given by the technology itself to move around your database into different places or different services. So that's also one factor. So cost is there, flexibility is there, and it's again user's choice, right? Other part which you can think about, you get the ability to negotiate with the vendors. So if you are not keeping your all apples into same baskets, then you have the ability that you can discuss, negotiate with the different vendors on the pricing, right? And it could be possible in the development environment, you need to have more and more databases available, and you would like to have a provider which are giving you low cost services and you use them. And based on the performance benefits which you get from the provider, based on the services which you get from the provider, you can decide where you want to host your production system, right? Or maybe a specific cost-based model, you would like to keep some production system on a one cloud provider and some production system into the other cloud provider. Yeah.
Vibor, I hear this negotiation thing brought up a lot. How realistic is that? Do we have the ability to kind of do a bit of arbitrage right now, or are they all kind of marching in lockstep?
They are trying to margin lot of places, but as you can see, the growth of the cloud, or you can say the people who are moving into the cloud, right? A lot of companies are trying to give you a very negotiable price. They want to bring you on board on their platform. And when you stuck with a one service provider, and you must have negotiated well also for 2 years, right? But after 2 years, when the contract is going to be over, you would like to rethink about, okay, what are the negotiating price? And it may be possible that other providers are giving you better price, right? And when they are offering a better price, you don't want to get locked into one specific vendor.
So
So
worst
again,
case, you have the
freedom.
option of hopping from promotional price to another promotional
Yeah,
price and
yeah.
just skating along that way.
Yes. And again, why people moving into the cloud? Because of this flexibility, right? Easy to create, easy to move your database or technology or application from one to the another. So all these ease of movement is also key part there, right? And that's why another thing is coming up is called microservices. From macro, which is like virtual machines, where our database services, to the microservices, where things are like a small container services where you are hosting your apps right into small services, and database is also running along with them. So so
So if
these are
you're
the
aiming
key.
for this kind of flexibility, it behooves you to not tie yourself to a single vendor and thus give up that flexibility.
Yeah, and that's the thing which I always recommend. You would like to see, if you're choosing a technology for your application like PostgreSQL itself, would you really want to go with a DBAS service, or would you like to go with the some modified version of the Postgres, which is like a database as a service for your application? So all these factors you would like to think through before you make a decision. And yeah, and again, when you're moving to the cloud, there should be a proper checklist you would like to create. Planning needs to be done, because it's not really like a shift and pick up and move into the cloud, right? Because As you can see, the databases which are terabytes in size and the performance which you might be expecting in on-prem, you may not get similar performance in the cloud. There will be some hit, right? Defining those benchmark, whatever monitoring you have defined it so far, moving those or again, leveraging the cloud functionality or the capabilities providers giving you, integrating with your monitoring system is also a key thing.
Now, this ties into something we were talking about last week with, or last episode with Dipanshu, where
Mhm.
it's easy to look at building a maintenance plan as, hey, you put together your big ass checklist and you're done. You just gotta follow it. And, well, no, you got to kind of look at what your needs are, right? If
Yeah.
you're, it doesn't matter how complex your plan is, if it doesn't align with what you're needing to get out of the system, then it's worthless.
Yeah, and the other factor which comes in the cloud migration is called transformation. Sometimes big monolithic application or big monolithic database, which is hosting multiple application, get actually broken down into small services or small applications, which are easy to move into the cloud, right? So that's why you need to plan it properly. It may be possible you are just using your legacy application and you're thinking to modernize that application, provide new services to your customers, and accordingly, you want to move into the cloud, right? So that's also one more aspect where you would like to look at whether you want to just move your existing monolithic application to the cloud and then transform those, or do you want to follow a transform journey and with that you move into the cloud?
Right. I mean, you've got this established home effectively, and you're considering, what options are there out there that make the most sense for your journey and also your ultimate landing, right? So
Mhm.
are you taking, one large, multi-story house and breaking it down into, let's say, a bunch of tiny homes on the same plot, and or are you looking at a different strategy where you want something that is more flexible to move in different places, right? Like the
Yeah,
equivalent, kind of like an RV, basically, right? And those are all considerations which different levels of cost, right? So where you're looking to have that multi-cloud capability, then you have to consider the fact that you're not necessarily divesting yourself of the need to have a full IT team, right? Because you're still going to have a fabric that can basically spread across those, but then maintain performance across all of those and
yeah,
ensure that there's, proper connectivity, uptime, consistency, all of that across wherever you may be deploying, right? Or if you're breaking it into like kind of the microservices concept, or breaking up a monolithic database into smaller databases, understanding whether or not the application code as it's structured today is going to work best. Either with the fact that you're going from one and large to small and many, even if you have that addressed, you also have to consider, the limitations that might exist of any given framework, right? I mean, if you look at AWS, where they've got some limitations on the CLI side around the max size of, let's say, put objects. There's a max size of the volumes that you can have. You have to make sure that you're taking all of these factors into consideration. You look at the networking side of things. If you look at AWS versus, let's say, Azure, we see a number of customers that are seeing the EIP as an analogous, basically
virtual.
equivalency for VIPs, right?
Yeah.
And we know that VIPs are handled differently in, let's say, Azure, right? So understanding that you should be making use of their load balancer versus making use of EIP and having a little bit different flexibility on Amazon. All these things have to be taken into consideration.
Mhm.
Um,
Jamie, you said something I want to tug on just a little bit. You talked about the motivation for doing this as a cost saving thing,
yep.
as a way of reducing your. Now this, uh, no offense, but that smells like snake oil because I've been hearing that for 30 years. You go back to what was it, the thin web clients back in the mid 90s where they're, Citrix is getting their start, Java, Oracle. Sun at the time was putting together the little bespoke bits of hardware that were going to replace all these PCs that were proliferating and going to massively decrease the amount of IT support you needed. And yeah, it didn't.
You're right. I mean, it's very much, if you take that on surface value, it's snake oil, right? Because you have to consider the fact that your costs don't necessarily go away; they just get diffused elsewhere. If you want the same approach of resiliency and performance, you're likely going to pay near the same, if not potentially more, because if you're going from an environment or a solution, a culture in which you didn't have cloud as a significant portion, DevOps in particular, where we're looking at people who are cloud conversant, who are container conversant, et cetera, like you've got a whole new set of skills that you either have to build and accept the expense of the ramp to actually have resources acquire those skills, or you have to bring in new resources, right? So your costs basically shift. Now,
This
yes,
gets us right into Doug's wheelhouse here, doesn't it?
right, exactly. And that's kind of what I want to touch on. So, Doug, from a DevOps perspective, what have you sort of seen, both obviously specifically in relation to Postgres, but also just where people take into consideration that journey? How often are people really prepared, not just for the minutia, but the overall implication of going to cloud, basically?
Well, sadly, they're not prepared. That's the quick answer. And yes, it's probably something that nobody wants to talk about, particularly the ones who are in charge. They'll say that they're fully prepared, that they have the skills for the people internally, externally, they have teams, they have documentation, that they're accountable, and that they're just moving, ready to move. But once you really start testing what they mentioned, that's a whole different ballgame. Why? Because three words: preparedness is not there, accountability is not taken into consideration, and well, nobody wants to be accountable, honestly. As a human, you don't want to be the one who takes
But you really don't want to be accountable if you're not prepared, right?
the conundrum. There you go. So people start moving into the cloud saying, okay, we got this, we have all these systems ready, but are you really knowing what they're even tagged or identified as? And much less, are they ready and backed up? Most
Right.
of the times, you'll find out that the simple tests, such as stopping your virtual machines, and you'll see how many emails you'll start getting immediately or sprawling in there. And the sprawl that everybody's creating virtual machines resources, it's a cost that if it's not tracked, it's going to start really affecting your budget. And as I mentioned, it's a very attractive to move from CapEx to OpEx. But also, Jamie mentioned there, you're just shifting.
Yep.
It's a shift. And then you start in an overall circle again. You cut a cost here in this slice, but then it comes back in another piece of the pie. It's a never-ending story, but really to focus, preparedness is not there. And that's, I think, one aspect that many organizations need to focus on: preparing their teams, having accountability, how to react, how to be proactive instead of reactive.
Sure.
Because a simple lack of a backup will cause headaches. If nobody's doing it or nobody knows what's happening in the background, you're just asking for trouble, delaying it. And whenever it happens, the disaster, that's when things start getting to be very awkward and ugly.
So there's no magic bullet here. If your organizational structure is screwed up, throwing a cloud at it ain't gonna fix it, huh?
That's one of those myths. Hey, it's free. The cloud is free or it's very cheap. Well, you pay what you get for it. And that's always a saying we hear all the time. But when you start adding, you pay for what you use. What's very little talked about too is the vendor lock-in. And everybody will say there is no vendor lock-in, even the own cloud vendors. And what does that mean? It's easy to get in, but to get out, that's a whole different ballgame because they charge you for getting the data out. For in, it's free. Why? Because think of it, the model. How are you going to get people or lure people into your environment? By not charging them. Where are you going to make the money? When they get out. And that's where the pretty penny starts piling up. Then you have to start thinking, how do we get the data out of one cloud into the other one? And
Well, this kind of doubles up with your point about disaster recovery, about backup and test and all that stuff. If you can't recover from losing it, then you're not going to be able to get out either.
Right.
And that's the point. They don't want you to get out. They want to keep you in there. Vendor lock-in. It's good to have your options open, as the board mentioned there. It's really good to have that thought ahead of time and be ready for it, because prices change, economies change, they shift, improve, and get worse. So you have to be ready for something, a plan to either migrate or stop at a point in time. Know what you're ready for, which comes back to that preparedness. You have to be ready to make a decision at a point in time, whether it's because of disaster, which honestly, you've seen all over the news. The clouds, they always claim to be fully resilient, but you have all these outages. Cloudflare went out, and what happened? It didn't matter that the cloud was resilient. It just actually proved that it was not as resilient as they thought. Nobody tested that before. You haven't tested your backups? How do you know they're reliable? How do you know if something fails, it will actually come back? Or if your system is truly elastic or scalable? Have you tried shutting down 10, 20 virtual machines of your cluster and see if it actually does scale or it's highly available? Those haven't been tested. They've just been in theory, put in a document, and of course the document will handle it. Or document, you can tell, oh, everything's highly available and scalable. Yes, we're all good.
So I got a question.
But also testing, your assumptions, right? Making sure that you've got the quality of actual test efforts and empirical results, right? Rather than just making an assumption that all of this stuff is mapped together in a Word doc or in a Visio or a Lucidchart or wherever you've got it. It's not just a pretty picture. These all have, a suite of test efforts behind them to show that, one, it works, and two, it works consistently.
Sure.
If you don't have your test environment set up, then you're in trouble. You can't actually prove what you say is good.
Yeah. And that's why you need to think through when you're planning about migrating from your on-prem to the cloud, right? And as I was thinking about this whole thing, and I was reading more about this one, the migration from on-prem to the cloud, there are 10 steps which I think really helps people to plan it, to prepare themselves, when they're moving into the cloud. Again, I'm here focusing mainly on the database and application side. There are the other factors too, but whenever customers reach out to us and discuss with me, I just share the 10 steps and plan it accordingly. One is that you should always have some kind of architect who knows your whole environment, what you're planning to move from your on-prem environment to the cloud. There should be some level of cloud integration thought process defined. When I'm saying cloud integration, it's not only at the technical level, and they should be, if you're moving towards like multi-cloud platforms, or if you're thinking about only one cloud where you want to go, right? What are the services which you could leverage? That's also a key thing. A thought through process should be there around which provider you would like to use for your cloud, right? It could be possible that you will negotiate and you will get a very good deal with the Google for your development environment, with AWS for your staging environment, Azure for your production environment. It could be possible. Again, you need to think about those and take those, always take these things into your consideration.
Yep.
Establish a proper KPIs, key performance indicators. When you're moving from your on-prem to the cloud, you don't want to lose the performance criteria for your application or database, right? Always create a benchmark which you would like to have been evaluated into the cloud when you move into the cloud. So those are the key things. You should have that kind of a baseline created properly. Then you prioritize exactly what application, what services, or if you're doing a transformation, which components you want to move, right? You include those prioritization clearly, or define those clearly, right? And then you refactor if there's anything which you think will not work as it is. into the cloud, or maybe you would like to use cloud services, for example, monitoring, right? There are many important services available which can actually tell you whether your virtual machine is going to get down or something is going on or something is got failed. You would like to leverage those key services too in your monitoring system so
Right.
that you will know exactly what's going on. And then after that, you plan the data migration, what migration you're planning, how you want to take your data, which is on the on-prem, to the cloud. And of course, think about the storage, which you would like to use, IOPS, which you need for your application to perform well, right? And then you plan complete switchover, exactly how you want to take your cutoff application, which is on the on-prem, to the cloud, right? And make sure that you notify your customers that there is switchover is going on. And after switchover also, you would like to follow some kind of backup strategy so that in case something goes wrong, you should be able to switch back, right? You don't want to affect your business while you
Right.
fix the problem. So all these are the important steps people should follow when they are thinking about moving from on-prem environment to the cloud.
Now, I'm going to tug on the monitoring thing because that's something we've leaned a lot on in past
Yeah.
episodes here. Uh, I have to figure you don't have quite the same set of options in the different cloud providers as you do on-prem. You guys have any advice on this, on pitfalls to look out for, or maybe additional capabilities that are open to you once you're looking at this leap?
Sure. There's, I've seen the most open one is the Google monitoring tools kit. It was actually belonging to another third-party company. When they acquired it, it's one of the most open ones. There's a few other tools out there, Datadog, which is a common
Yep.
heard one. It's easily integratable, very lightweight agents. It works well. You create your dashboards. The same with the Google one. AWS has its own. So it's a matter of picking and choosing. And as Vibor mentioned, you have to have a backup tool, that monitoring too as well. They can go down. You never know. You have to think of, I guess, probably misusing the word hybrid approach, which is commonly used for cloud and on premise, but you have to take into account what will go wrong.
Right. I mean, especially depending upon how distanced your applications or your monitoring is going to be from your databases, resetting your perspective on thresholds or just the difference in technology, right? So where you're monitoring, are you doing agent-based or agentless? And what are the implications of either of those from a latency perspective, false positives for alarms, or false negatives, making sure that you've got an understanding. And making sure that whatever you land on, to Doug's point, whether it's hybrid or you go with what you believe to be, I guess, the most consistent one that can go across multiple clouds, making sure that you've got the understanding that latency on one doesn't equate to the same latency on another. And
Yeah.
what are the differences across all of those, right? Whether you're using Datadog as an example, which has some heavy integrations with AWS, or you're using Prometheus, which is a little bit looser and is, can be leveraged on-prem and across a whole bunch of things, or you have something that's a little bit more classic, such as a Nagios implementation. Understanding how deeply these integrate, whether you're using infrastructure as a service and your database just sits on top of the compute, or you're using database as a service, right? All of those things are crucial. And ultimately, all of this comes down to consistency and thorough testing, right? Thorough thinking, thorough testing, thorough execution, and consistent actions. And the consistency is one thing we haven't tugged too much on outside of talking about, making sure things are documented and tested. But one final piece that I think is worth noting is consistency also means that you've got a level of automation, especially if you're going into microservices, right? Where if you're building up and tearing down environments or machines or databases on any regular basis, making sure that it's done the same way or the right way every time according to a specific set of rules is pretty crucial, right? And it's done differently for some people on-prem versus in the cloud. And I know that you guys have done a lot of work on kind of getting some examples, some solid examples out there that allow people to build on to deliver that in their own journeys. And I wonder if you guys could talk about that for a minute.
Sure, we've been focusing on infrastructure as code, which is one of the key ways to achieve that exact consistency across your clouds. And going Terraform, Ansible, Puppets are one of the major names, and even a new contender as of lately, Pulumi, which utilizes your own language. So if you like Go, utilize Go to create your infrastructure as code. It's a little bit different, but it's out there, and some people are starting to realize it's an option there. Just the fact that you can use your own language if you like Python, Go, or any other one. Even Node.js is available for it. But as important as we've been talking, consistency. Make sure you create your set of rules in code. That way you can reproduce it later on. Why? Because disasters are just waiting to happen. They will happen. It's not a matter of if they will happen, it's just when. And if you're ready for them, you're just going to be enjoying it and a little panicky, but it's not going to be as bad as seeing everything fall down or the ship going down and sinking and you along with it.
Sidestep some of that accountability you were talking about before too, right?
Yeah.
Where you have to depend on somebody writing down what they're doing and why. Maybe they did it and didn't write it down. Maybe they wrote it down and didn't do it. If you have those two locked together in your configuration as your code, then you got one less failure to worry about.
Great. Well, thanks, guys. Want to obviously extend my thanks to Doug for joining. Where we're going towards the next session, we're about several weeks out at this point, 3 to be precise, because we're trying to shift to a slightly different audience mode where we're going to be focusing mostly on the on-demand. So look for us in the coming 3 weeks, and we'll be out there on social media looking for your questions and your conversations in advance of then. So that way, we can still kind of keep the rhythm and the pulse of the conversation going as we go into that mode. Again, keep an eye out for the blog that we've got coming next week, and keep an eye out for the subsequent sessions. And I want to thank everyone for your time.
Thanks, Jamie.
Thank you.
Yeah, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you.